I still hear them at night. 3 small voices whispering just outside my door, calling me by a name I haven't used since childhood. And if you think ghost children can't hurt you, you've never heard one giggle while standing in the dark behind you. Before we begin, please tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I might dig up terrifying real stories from your hometown next. Make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, like and comment so you don't miss more true horror stories, and watch until the end, because this story's final twist will leave you stunned. I grew up on a quiet street in northern Illinois, the kind of place people describe as safe, where everyone left their doors unlocked and kids ran barefoot in the summer. My childhood home still stands there, though I haven't stepped back inside for years. Not after what happened, but recently, after my father passed away. I was forced to return to the house to sort through what was left. I'm almost 34 now, but walking into that place felt like stepping into a memory that never wanted to stay buried. The moment I opened the front door, the house hit me with that same faint smell of dust and cold wood. It was like time hadn't moved at all since I was a kid. Even though the walls looked more cracked, the floorboards more warped. For a second, I almost convinced myself it was just nostalgia making me uneasy. But then I heard something. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from upstairs, like tiny fingertips drumming against the banister. I froze, because that sound was something I hadn't heard since I was 9 years old. Back then, I used to hear tapping on the walls at night, always slow at first, like someone lightly brushing their fingers on the plaster. It would move from the corner of my room, across the baseboard, up toward my closet. I tried telling my parents, but they blamed mice or tree branches outside. Except, the tapping always came from inside the house. Standing in that empty hallway, adult me tried to rationalize the noise. The house settling, maybe a squirrel in the attic, but the tapping grew louder, closer. And then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. I shook off the chill creeping up my back and tried to focus on why I was there. Most of my father's belongings were boxed up by the hospice workers, so I just needed to pack a few leftover items from his bedroom. But the deeper into the house I walked, the more familiar the unease felt. Like the air was heavier, thicker. The house had always felt too cold, no matter the season. My mother blamed poor insulation. I blamed something else. On my way to the stairs, I passed the old photos lining the hallway. Family pictures, school portraits, and one photo that always bothered me. It was a school field trip picture from when I was in first grade. A bunch of kids standing in front of a museum, smiling, squinting in the sun. But right behind me, dead center in the background, stood a pale, dark-haired boy I didn't remember at all. Every time I looked at that picture, he seemed slightly out of place, like he wasn't standing with us, but watching us. People told me it was just a kid from another class. I believed that until I was about 10 when I woke up one night and saw that same pale face peeking around the corner of my bedroom doorway. I didn't sleep in my room after that, so walking up the staircase felt wrong in every possible way. The wood creaked under me, echoing through the empty house. Halfway up, I caught the faint scent of something sweet, like old flowers left too long in a vase. That scent wasn't new. When I was a kid, I used to smell it just before something strange happened. It always lingered briefly, then disappeared, leaving the air colder than before. I reached my father's bedroom, pushed the door open, and the window on the far wall slowly slid shut on its own. There was no wind. The house was completely still. I stood frozen for several seconds, staring at the window, waiting for, I don't know, an explanation. Then, from behind me, down the hallway, came the sound of soft footfalls, light, almost playful, like a child running. My chest tightened. I knew those footsteps. I'd heard them for years growing up. 3 sets. Always 3. I stepped backward into the room and shut the door. My hand shook as I clicked the lock. Something I never had to do as a kid because my dad had removed the lock from my room after I started barricading the door every night. He thought I was feeding into my own nightmares. But the truth was, I wasn't dreaming. Primera, Hua, ese hiding. I tried to focus on the boxers by the bed, the awkward silence of the room, the dim afternoon light. I told myself it was all stress, that grief was making me hear things. But when I crouched down to pick up a cardboard box, I heard whispering behind the door. Children's voices. 3 soft, overlapping whispers, too faint to make out words, but unmistakably real. My breath hitched. The voices grew slightly louder, as if leaning closer to the other side of the door. One of them giggled a short, breathy sound that made the tiny hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And then something tapped the door. Not a knock, not a bang, just a single, curious tap, as if a small hand wanted to see if I'd respond. I stood completely still, box halfway in my hands, listening. Another tap, then another. Slow, deliberate, like they wanted me to know they were there, that they remembered me. My voice cracked when I whispered, "What do you want?" Silence. For a moment, I thought maybe they had gone, but then, in the softest, highest voice, the voice of the smallest child, I heard, "We want to play." The moment I heard that tiny voice whisper, "We want to play," every instinct in my body screamed for me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The air felt thick and unmoving, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I stayed frozen by the half-packed box, staring at the door like something might push it open from the other side. For several seconds, nothing happened. No more tapping, no more giggling, no more whispers. I could almost believe I imagined it till the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, deliberately. Metal squeaking under the pressure of a small, unseen hand. I backed away until my back hit the dresser. The door was locked, but the knob still twisted left, then right, then stop, and then the temperature in the room dropped so quickly, my breath fogged out in front of me. When I was a kid, that cold always came before they appeared. I shut my eyes, forcing myself to breathe slowly. I told myself I was an adult. I told myself the past couldn't hurt me. I told myself ghosts weren't real. I told myself anything that might keep me from losing my mind. But the house had other plans. Something slid across the floor behind me, a soft scraping sound. I spoonaroommed, expecting to see a box shifting or something falling over, but nothing had moved. Nothing in the room was out of place, except the shadows. The far corner of the room looked darker than it should have been. Not dimmerung, like the darkness there wasn't caused by a lack of light, but by something occupying the space. Something watching me. Something that had been waiting. I blinked, and the darkness shifted slightly as if something small had pulled back, hiding deeper in the corner. My pulse hammered in my ears. I forced myself to turn away and focus on the boxers again. I needed to finish packing and get out. I could stay at a hotel for the night and come back with someone else in the morning. I'd pay a stranger to help if I had to. Anything to avoid being alone in this house again. But as I bent down to tape one of the boxes shut, a soft breath brushed the back of my neck. Primera jerked away, slamming against the dresser so hard the lamp on top rattled. I whipped around, hoping to see an open window, or even some kind of draft. But the window was sealed tight, locked. The room was still, silent, airless. The breath wasn't my imagination. I knew that with absolute certainty. I stared at the empty room, my chest rising and falling too fast, my skin prickling with goosebumps. "Why now?" I whispered. Why, after all these years? I shouldn't have asked. Because something answered. A voice childlike, but not a child, whispered from somewhere near the floor. So close, it sounded like it was right behind my foot. "You came back." My body locked up again. I stared at the floor, terrified to look down. The shadows under the bed seemed to ripple, stretching toward me in narrow tendrils. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of a rug. I had to get out. I didn't have to finish packing. I didn't have to stay. Nothing in this house was worth it. I grabbed my bag and moved toward the door, but before I could reach it, something small slid under the door from the hallway. A piece of paper. My heart pounded as I crouched down, hesitating before picking it up. The paper looked yellowed and brittle, like it had been torn from an old notebook. Childlike scribbles covered the front in faded pencil. At first, I couldn't tell what the drawing was supposed to be. Then I realized it was 3 stick figure children. standing beside a fourth stick figure lying on the ground. The 3 children were smiling. The one on the ground had X's 4 eyes. My stomach twisted. I flipped the paper over. Written messily on the back, in uneven, childish handwriting, were the words, "We remember what you did." The paper slipped from my fingers. "What I did," I whispered. My voice trembled. "I didn't do anything," but even as I said it, my hands shook with a strange, buried dread. A part of me, some old instinct from childhood, knew. They believed I had done something unforgivable. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Then another. Then the soft patter of small feet running down the hall, growing louder, closer. I heard giggling 3 voices laughing, overlapping, excited. They were running toward the door. I leaped back just as something slammed into the other side of it hard enough to rattle the frame. I stumbled and fell against the wall. Another Islam. And another. Like 3 children were throwing themselves against the door, trying to force it open. The doorknob twisted violently. I grabbed the bedside table and shoved it in front of the door, then backed away again. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly breathe. "Stop!" I yelled, though I didn't know why. "Please just stop." The slamming stopped abruptly. Silence. Except not silence. In that awful quiet, I heard something else. A scratching sound. Soft. Slow. Coming from low on the door. Like small fingers dragging up and down the wood. Then, I whisper longer this time. Drawn out. Almost sings, "We know what you did. We know. We know." My entire body was trembling. I backed away until I hit the far wall. "I didn't do anything," I whispered again, my voice cracking, but the scratching only got louder. More frantic, more insistent, like they were trying to carve through the door. Tiny nails, tiny hands, tiny voices repeating the same phrase again and again. "We know what you did." I covered my ears, but I could still hear them whispering right behind me, right in my head. Right inside the house that had never let me go. Then suddenly the noise stopped. I waited 5 seconds. 10, 15. Nothing. I slowly stepped toward the door, my breath shaking. The scratching, the whispers, the cold. All of it was gone. I dared to kneel and look through the tiny crack at the bottom of the door. All I could see was the dark hallway, and 3 small shadows standing completely still, facing the door, not moving. Just waiting. As I stared, one of the shadows lifted its hand and slid another piece of paper under the door. This time, in larger, darker letters written, so hard the pencil nearly tore the page, it said, "We want to tell you the truth." When that second piece of paper slid under the door, something in me snapped. Part terror, part confusion, part a strange, heavy fear that felt old, as if some memory I'd buried decades ago was stirring inside me, pushing against my ribs, begging to surface. "We want to tell you the truth." I stared at the words until they blurred. The house was silent again, unnervingly so, and a part of me wished the giggles, the whispers, even the scratching would return, because the quiet felt worse. The quiet meant they were waiting for me to make the next move, and for reasons I couldn't explain. I knew I had to. Slowly, I pushed the bedside table away from the door. My hands were still shaking, but I forced myself to stand, forced myself to unlock the door, forced myself to breathe. When the lock clicked open, the silence deepened, as if the entire house was listening. I pulled the door toward me just a few inches. The hallway outside was empty. No shadows. No giggles. No footprints. Just a long, narrow hallway I remembered from childhood, except the light was dimmer somehow, like the air itself was tinted with dusk. I stepped out. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and the familiar cold washed over me again. Not the sharp, sudden cold from before, but a deep, sinking chill that felt almost sorrowful. At the far end of the hallway, I saw movement. A small silhouette, a child, standing perfectly still. Then 2 more silhouettes stepped into view beside it. 3 children. 3 small figures. All silent, all facing me. My breath caught in my throat. They didn't move as I slowly approached. Not even when I reached halfway down the hallway. I could make out more of their shapes now. One slightly taller, one shorter, one standing in the middle like a leader. Their clothes looked old, like faded outfits from the 1980s or 90s. The smallest child held something in his hands, something I couldn't quite see. When I got within 10 feet, they stepped back, not running, not fading, just calmly turning toward the staircase, as if silently directing me to follow. My body moved on its own. As I followed them downstairs, the air grew colder, and that faint, sweet smell returned, the same one I used to smell before the tapping began when I was young. The children led me into the living room, a room I'd avoided ever since I was 8 years old. The blinds were drawn, casting long, twisted shadows across the floor. The children stood near the middle of the room and then turned toward me. For a brief moment, the light shifted in just the right way, and I saw their faces. They weren't monstrous. They weren't rotting. They weren't demonic. They were simply sad. 3 pale faces. 3 pairs of dark, hollow-looking eyes. 3 expressions that weren't angry, but pleading. The smallest child stepped forward, holding out the object in his hand, a small metal toy car. Red, scratched, bent on one side. My heart lurched. I recognized it instantly. It had belonged to a boy named Mark, the kid who lived across the street when I was young. He'd been 8 years old. He'd gone missing one winter afternoon and was never found. I swallowed hard. No, I whispered. Mark wasn't. He didn't. I wasn't. My thoughts scattered. The second child stepped forward and held out a different object. A tiny plastic bracelet made of cheap beads. Blue, yellow, green. I remember that too. It belonged to a girl named Shelley, a shy kid who used to sit next to me at the bus stop. She'd vanished during a neighborhood block party. Everyone assumed she wandered off. Search teams looked for weeks. They never found her either. And then the third child, the tallest, held out the last object. A single, worn shoelace. Pink. Frayed at the ends. My chest tightened. That shoelace had belonged to Emma, my cousin. She visited only a few times a year, and on her last visit, she'd run out of the house crying because we'd argued. She disappeared somewhere between my street and the park. I never saw her again. The 3 children stood before me, holding the items like offerings, like evidence. No, I whispered again, backing up. I didn't do anything. I didn't. I was a kid. I was just a kid. The tallest child tilted his head, not accusingly, but almost understandingly. Then he pointed. Not at me. Not at the door. Not at the stairs. He pointed toward the basement. My entire body went cold. No, I said, but my voice came out like a whimper. No, I never went down there. My dad, he kept it locked. I wasn't allowed. The children kept staring, waiting, and suddenly, it hit me. My father, his strictness, his temper, his constant presence whenever I tried to go near that part of the house. The padlock he kept on the basement door, the heavy carpenter tools he stored down there, his weird late-night noises I'd once thought were the house settling, and his final, whispered confession when he slipped into a morphine haze during hospice. Don't go in the basement. Don't let the kids in. I didn't understand it then, but I understood it now. My father hadn't been warning me about ghost children. He'd been warning me about the truth. My hands shook violently as I stepped toward the basement door. The children followed silently behind me. I reached for the knob. It turned easily. The lock was gone. Or maybe it had never been locked at all. A wave of cold air rushed up the stairs as I pulled the door open. The smell hit me first. Musty earth, wet concrete, and something else. Something metallic. Something... The staircase creaked as I descended, the children's soft footsteps behind me. At the bottom I pulled the string for the single hanging bulb. The light flickered on. The basement was colder than any place I'd ever been. But more than that, it filled. Double shelves lined the walls. Dust-covered boxers, old furniture, rusty tools, and in the far corner, something wooden. Something big. A trunk. A trunk I remembered seeing once as a child. A trunk my father yelled at me for touching. A trunk I'd forgotten about for decades. The three ghost children stood in a semicircle around it. Their heads lowered, as if mourning. I walked forward, every step feeling heavier than the last. The trunk was old. The latch was rusty. My fingers trembled as I reached down. The children watched. I opened the trunk. I won't describe what I saw inside. Not because it was graphic, though it was. Not because it was horrifying, though it absolutely was. I won't describe it, because even now, I can't accept that any of it was real. But the children, their faces softened, almost relieved, as if they'd finally been heard. As if someone finally knew the truth. When I looked up, they were fading. Slowly, peacefully. The smallest one whispered, "Thank you." Then they vanished. I stood alone in the silent basement for a long time. Eventually, I closed the trunk. I called the police. I told them what I found. They asked questions I still don't know how to answer. My father will never stand trial. But the children were finally found. And every night since, I swear I still hear soft footsteps outside my bedroom door. 3 sets. Light. Playful. Peaceful. Waiting. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, and I might uncover terrifying true stories from your hometown next. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so you never miss more real horror stories that will keep you up at night.